Thank you very much, and welcome to this Intelligence Squared Economic Outlook in partnership with Guinness Global Investors. I am Johnny Diamond, and I am thrilled to both meet and to introduce our guest tonight, Tim Harford, senior columnist, as I'm sure you know, at the Financial Times, where he is the undercover economist, revealing the economic ideas behind everyday life. He is also the author of a number of books, one of which is here, as you can see, which he will be signing after the event this evening. But most importantly, of course, he is the host of the BBC Radio 4 series More or Less, which debunks the statistics come up with by idiots like myself when we're presenting the programme. So thank you very much for that, Tim.
So it's like that already, is it, Johnny? It's getting a bit chippy already. Okay.
Not at all, not at all. If you are not a listener, I can recommend it heartily. It's superb, rather low-key but brilliant debunking of statistics used all around the country and all around the globe. The format for this evening is I will pepper Tim with questions for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to you, both those people here in the audience and people watching on the live stream. Please do put your questions in on the live stream. They come handily to the iPad in front of me, and I will mix those in with the questions from those who've actually bothered to make it out tonight. So do put your questions in. We'll see how long we want to have Tim and myself talking. I'd prefer, frankly, to hear from you than I would from me. I'm sure you would as well. So we'll see where it goes. But first of all, I want to ask about the economy, if I may, for Tim. Not so much where you think it is going, but more, I suppose, what you think the big forces are that are shaping the economy at the moment.
Well, I mean, the big picture for the UK economy, as we've been discussing for 15, 16 years now, I mean, it's getting on for 20 years, is this is just an economy that's not performing. It's growing very slowly. Pick whichever prime minister you want to blame for it. You can blame Liz Truss, you can blame Gordon Brown, blame David Cameron, blame any of them. They've all played their role. They've all been in charge for various important moments, all the way back to the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. And I think the cumulative effect of the slow growth is often just underrated. So we're now, I think, about 25, 30% below where we would be if we'd continued that growth trajectory. So, by the way, those of you who are environmentalists and who are fans of degrowth, this is what it looks like. It's not actually that much fun, and so the result of that, fundamentally, is you get a situation where simultaneously we keep hearing about how the tax burden is the highest it's been since the 1940s, which is true, and it keeps going up. And at the same time, we can't seem to get the public services together. So that's what's going on. Why is it growing so slowly? It's a combination of mysterious forces, bad luck, and self-inflicted injuries. So if you want to go for the bad luck, I mean, look at, for example, global energy prices and the fact that we're unusually exposed to them because of the way our gas market is structured, raises energy costs. If you want to look at the self-inflicted injuries, Brexit has caused a tremendous amount of uncertainty. It's really hit business investment and just made it more difficult to trade with our this huge economy on our doorstep at a time when the other two options, which is trade with China and trade with America, are also looking rather dodgy. And then there's mysterious stuff. I mean, to some extent, it's not clear, for example, why productivity is quite so disappointing. Every major economy has had slow productivity growth. But what exactly is wrong with the UK? Why our performance has been so disappointing? I see various explanations. There's an awful lot of different things you could put together. We could talk longer about productivity and how to possibly increase it. But there's no one big thing you can point to and go, that's the thing. If we were only able to fix that, then we'd be sorted.
Are you convinced that, I mean, given the mysterious forces, given the bad luck, are you convinced that governments can effect real change?
They could certainly make things worse. I think the governments can make change. So you can have a well-designed tax system, or you can have a messy tax system. You can invest in sensible public infrastructure, or you can squander the money. You can have rules that get in the way, for example, of planning and development, or you can have rules that permit it. So there are various things that you can do to make things worse or better, but I don't think anybody should expect that it's this magical process where under good government, the economy grows at 4% a year, and under bad government it shrinks at 4% a year, and it's just like flicking a switch. I mean, you can have truly appalling governments. Thankfully, we haven't had any of those. I mean, like really, just fire up the printing presses, just print money, produce hyperinflation, start a few wars. I mean, you can destroy an economy if you really try. But generally, it's shades of grey. You're dealing with more or less degrees of incompetence. I guess this is a roundabout way of saying, if the new government under Keir Starmer just did brilliantly and got everything right, which it shows no particular signs of doing, I don't think anybody should expect that suddenly, with a leap and a bound, the British economy is free. There's a lot going on in a £2 trillion economy like ours, and government only moves around the margins.
You spend a lot of time both analysing data, thinking about data, talking about data. Do you have sort of general advice on how to think clearly about data?
Yeah, I kind of do. But should you not wish to buy a copy of How to Make the World Add Up, which is 10 easy rules to make sense of statistics, let me boil it down. Okay, no one wants to buy a book these days with Christmas coming up. Who would want a signed, personalised copy of a book for one of their No, it's a ridiculous idea. So let me instead just give you the kind of the bullet point summary. 3 easy rules then, instead of 10. And to make it simple, they all begin with C. So number 1 is to be calm when you are faced with a statistical claim. Follow the advice of my great statistical hero, Darth Vader. Search your feelings. And the reason I advise this is because our preconceptions, our emotions, whether we're angry, sad, frightened. Remember thinking back to the early stages of COVID, how frightening it was. That does not help you think more clearly. And I'm not saying don't have emotions. I mean, I'm not advising you to all become economists. But I am saying notice your emotions. If you notice your emotional reaction to a claim, you're more likely to parse it in a sensible way. And it's worth bearing in mind that most of the claims you will see because they arouse emotions. That's why they went viral on social media. That's why the editor of the Today programme said, well, let's start with this, because it's the exciting story. So number 1, be calm. Number 2 is to get context. I mean, what do I mean by context? Well, I mean, like many nerdy people, and maybe I'm among fellow nerds, like many nerdy people, I suffer from premature enumeration, which I'm not embarrassed to say it. I think we should be able to talk about these things. And premature enumeration is this sort of moment where you see a number, or you see a set of numbers, and you just grab the numbers and you start analysing. Well, let's take a ratio, let's plot a graph, let's just calculate percentages, because that feels comfortable to a certain kind of person, including me. Whereas actually the first thing you should be doing is going, what's the definition of that number, actually? Were we talking about GDP or GDP per capita? Could we just be clear about that? Is that when you say, the number of nurses in the NHS has increased, is that 2 part-time nurses? Is that 2 nurses or is it 1 nurse? Yeah. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but can we just understand where that number came from and who produced it, what it means? Is it going up or down? What would it look like if you went over to France? What's their number? All of these different comparisons, definitions, none of this is technical. None of this involves higher-level mathematics. It's just basic descriptions of the numbers. So calm, context. The last piece of advice is curiosity. And curiosity means using numbers to illustrate the world around us. Like an astronomer might use a telescope, or a radiographer might, is it radiographer or radiologist? I always get confused. Radiographer might use an X-ray machine. You're using statistics to show you things, to show you patterns you couldn't possibly see in any other way. And it might seem obvious, like, oh yeah, obviously statistics are things that we use to understand the world, but generally they're not things we use to understand the world. They're things we use to sell toothpaste or to win some argument. You know, we throw these statistics around like weapons, and they shouldn't be used like weapons. They should be used like telescopes or X-ray machines. They should be used to tell us something about the world. And if that is the way you approach statistics, with the spirit of curiosity rather than, oh, I'm really going to land a killer blow with this stat, that's a much healthier way to view statistics. Calm, context, curiosity.
And never trust things that come in threes, presumably, as well.
Never, absolutely not. Anybody who uses the rhetorical rule of three cannot possibly be trusted.
We recently, as I'm sure you noticed, had a budget in the UK. Of course, one of the big issues that came out of it, always does, is tax. Who to tax, how much to tax, different groups. Is there a good tax system? I mean, there are rules and ideas that make for a good tax system, and did you recognise that in the recent budget?
No, not as much as I would have liked. There are rules for a good tax system. They were laid out by a report commissioned by and conducted under the auspices of the Institute for Fiscal Studies 15 years ago. It was called the Murley's Review. As Tax by Design is the final report. James Murley's Nobel Prize winner in economics. Led a great team, and you can just go and read it if you like. It's 300 pages of nerdy stuff about tax. But they lay out the basic principles that you might want a good tax system to adhere to. For example, you don't want something to be treated differently for tax reasons just because you kind of change the label on it. The same kind of activity taxed different ways if you can stick a different label on it. So, for example, instead of calling this income, maybe we could call it a capital gain. And instead of paying income tax, we could pay capital gains tax. So this is the carried interest loophole people get very upset about. Or, you're doing a job for somebody. Are you employed by them or are you self-employed by them? Every now and then I have to fill in a questionnaire for the BBC because HMRC has asked them to fill in a questionnaire to prove that I'm self-employed. Well, I mean, I'm actually employed by somebody else. I'm employed by the FT. And I need to fill in all these sort of questions to prove that I'm not employed by the BBC, that I'm instead self-employed. And why do I have to prove this? Because self-employment incurs less tax. There's no reason why it really should incur less tax, and I would have to fill in fewer questionnaires if they didn't have this kind of, they hadn't created this wedge. And I think, there are many, many other things you could say, but I think, above all, a tax system is a system. So it's very, very common for people to fixate on a particular feature of the system, to say, well, this tax is not fair, or think about how unreasonable this tax, this particular part of the tax system disadvantages the poor, disadvantages some vulnerable group, or is unfair in this way or that way. And actually you have to look at the whole system put together. The whole system put together might be very progressive or not, even if an individual tax isn't. So, I mean, there are all kinds of things that you might hope to see in the tax system, and successive governments, including this one, but basically every government going back 30, 40 years has tended to complicate the tax system, introduce new rates, introduce new exemptions. Very, very good if you're an accountant or a tax lawyer, but not great for raising the maximum amount of revenue while imposing the minimum cost on the taxpayer. So it always slightly disheartens me. Do you want to know what cheers me up, though?
No, please.
What cheers me up is weird taxes. So, I mean, I love looking at weird taxes. There's the flapjack tax.
The flapjack tax.
So, as you know, Johnny, I'm sure, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows, cakes are tax exempt, VAT exempt, whereas biscuits are subject to VAT, which created a big debate over the Jaffa cake. It was a big famous Jaffa cake. By the way, my favourite pub quiz round that I've ever seen is the quizmaster brought out a plate of different things for each table, and you had to eat the things that were VAT exempt. It's brilliant. Anyway, so Jaffa Cakes, the Jaffa Cake company, the McVitie's, they baked an enormous Jaffa Cake for the judge to demonstrate that it was a cake, and I think they won their case.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a more recent case about flapjack. Because as you all know, for logical reasons, flapjack counts as a cake, not a biscuit. And the reason seems to be, well, it's flapjack, isn't it? It's kind of bake sales and tea with grandma at 4 o'clock, flapjack. But if it's chocolate coated, that then becomes biscuit territory. Cereal bars, I think, also biscuit. So it's a very difficult case where this company was making protein-enhanced, there were these twin packs of flapjack. So one had carbs and one had protein. And you have the carbs before the exercise and protein afterwards, I think. I don't know. You're swole, John. You'd know.
Disgusting.
Yeah, well, this was the question, because the judges, in the middle of this court case, started eating these things. And basically the idea was, well, is this good enough to be a flapjack? Is this the kind of thing you would serve with cucumber sandwiches at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or not? Because if it was, it's a cake, and it's VAT exempt. And anyway, these judges are like, oh, no, I don't think it's got the right mouthfeel at all. And so they had to pay VAT. And so this is not what I would call a good tax system, but it is extremely calming to me to contemplate such cases.
When you contemplate the expansion of the complexity of the tax system, obviously good news for accountants, do you ever believe that will become simplified, or do you think that there are so many different interests that would be affected by any simplification that it is simply too hard for governments to tackle? I
mean, the tax system does periodically get simplified. Right. Every now and then someone comes and sort of sweeps away all kinds of complexities. And I think these complexities are like barnacles. They tend to kind of grow on a tax system. And the reason they grow is because, everyone's looking for the rabbit that the chancellor's going to pull out of the hat, right? Everyone's going to looks for the little trick. And usually it's quite difficult to have a trick that's like, well, we're just going to cut income tax by 5%. I mean, that's hard to do. So you're looking for little favors to do here or there, or you're looking for ways, if you need to raise revenue, you're looking for ways to raise revenue around the back door, kind of withdraw this allowance here or tax this little thing there. And so those pressures, the budgetary process, the whole pantomime around the budget with the red suitcase, all of that pushes you towards more complexity. And then every now and then someone has, and it hasn't happened for a while in the UK, someone has to come along and say, you know what, we're going to clear all of this away, and the process of simplification is going to be this big vision that a government has. And maybe one day we'll get that, and then the complexities will slowly come back. But it doesn't mean it's worth scraping the barnacles off the hull, even if the barnacles do eventually come back. But yes, it's tricky. I mean, I point out, just to give you an example, all this stuff about VAT. In Denmark, anybody ever been to Denmark? It's nice in Denmark. It's very nice. They seem to be fine. No one thinks of Denmark as being this kind of libertarian Mad Max hellhole. It's perfectly fine. In Denmark, VAT is 25%, just on everything. Just on everything. No one's got like, well, what about we should VAT, we can't have VAT on period pants, you can't have VAT on children's shoes, you can't have VAT on sandwiches, unless they're toasted sandwiches. Obviously you can have VAT on toasted sandwiches. The Danes are like, you know what? We just have VAT on everything. It raises a lot of money. It's a very efficient tax. It really minimizes distortion. And then you can go, if we're worried about low-income families finding it difficult to afford period products and children's shoes, maybe we should improve the benefits system. And maybe we should give people more sources of higher-paying work, rather than messing around with weird VAT loopholes. So that's how they do it in Denmark. It can be done. I just hope that we do it at some stage.
Let's talk about America, if we could, because there was an extraordinary example there it seemed in the recent election, where it was not the economy stupid. That great line that was said, back in the 90s.
James Carville, yeah.
Exactly.
James Carville, yeah.
One focus on a campaign, and it's the economy stupid. In this case, you had an economy that, to most economists, was doing very well, certainly compared with its international peers, and yet the incumbents were thrown out, effectively.
Yeah.
And there's continuing discussion and debate over how that happened.
Yeah.
What is your understanding? What do you look at?
So I think there are two things going on. One is it's obviously not just the economy. And James Carville never said it's only the economy. He actually had three messages he was trying to remind people in the Clinton campaign of. And one of the messages he wanted Clinton to drive home was, it's the economy, stupid. It's not that the economy is the only thing that matters, but this is a thing that Clinton can win an election by emphasizing. So it isn't just the economy. And there are all kinds of cultural issues, all sorts of things. But one of the ways in which you can see it's not just the economy is if you look at how people think the economy is doing. And the answer is, it depends who's president. If a Republican is in the White House, Republicans think the economy is doing fine. And if a Democrat's in the White House, Democrats think the economy is doing fine. And you can see this Gallup collect this time series, and you can see this time series, and they just flip every time the White House flips. It's astonishing. And I was looking recently at the scale of the flip, like how much of a collapse so Democrats now think the economy is doing very badly, or they're about to think that the economy is doing very badly because Trump's in the White House. How big is that shift? And the answer is, well, it's of similar size or maybe bigger than COVID, the financial crisis, the dot-com crash. I mean, it's bigger than the impact of real economic events. Some of these economic events, very, very serious. So it's clearly not just the economy. It's perceived through the lens of politics. That said, it does seem surprising that, the economy does matter to people, and it does seem surprising. The US has enjoyed about 10% economic growth since COVID. Yeah. And France, 3%. The UK, less than 3%. Germany, 0%. I think the nearest, Canada and Italy, have had about 5 or 6%. So the US has basically done twice as well as any other G7 economy, and 3 or 4 times as well as France or the UK. So I might think, look, that's a good performance. And yes, there was inflation, but the inflation's largely gone away, and real wages, wages have outpaced inflation, so people are better off. You look at all of that and you think, the economy's done great under Biden. What are voters worried about? But I think it's worth just looking at other things, and not just inflation. So, for example, you look at the trajectory of real wages. Yes, they've gone up, but they haven't gone up anywhere near at the trajectory that they went up in the years before COVID, when Trump was in the White House. The employment to population ratio, the employment to prime age population ratio, has not recovered. It's recovered in Europe. That's basically the number of people aged, I think it's 25 to 55, if I remember. The proportion of those people who have jobs. That's not increased over the last 5 years. So although the unemployment rate is low, that suggests there's some kind of disconnection from the labour market. And there are other things. So, for example, inflation is higher for poorer households.
This is cheapflation.
Cheapflation, so basically the cheaper goods. If you look, pasta's increased by this much, but if you look at the cheapest pastas, they've increased by more, which kind of makes sense because the more expensive pastas, they've got more room they're not so influenced by the cost of raw materials. They can sort of adjust a bit. So there are lots of reasons why you would go, the economy is doing well. The economy did well under Biden, but maybe just because it did well in general doesn't mean it did well for everybody, and in particular doesn't mean it did well for swing voters. And that's a political message, but there's a broader message as well, which is generally, as economists, we tend to think in terms of aggregates, we tend to think in terms of averages. So, what's the unemployment rate for the economy? What's the inflation rate for the economy? What's GDP growth for the economy? And some of those measures, are flawed, and some of those measures I think are pretty good, but they're all averages. And, a rainbow is on average white. There's a lot going on under the surface of the average.
Just a reminder, we will be taking questions from the audience here and online. If you are online, please feel free to put your questions in. They will pop up here, and I will put them to Tim once he and I have stopped chatting. Can we talk about the opinion polls? Did you believe them?
Well, they said it was close, didn't they? I believed that it was close.
Yeah.
But I thought they'd probably be wrong one way or another. I didn't know how
It's sort of
much.
coin toss way.
Yeah. I didn't know in which direction. So it's a bit strange. So the last 3 presidential elections, the polls have all been wrong in favor of the Republicans. So Biden had such a big lead in 2000 that it didn't matter. But it turns out that election was tighter than it seemed, and his lead was not as big as it seemed. Clinton had a lead over Trump in 2016. Kamala Harris had a lead in the popular vote over Trump that in the opinion polls that turned out not to materialize. So that's 3 successive presidential elections in which the polls have kind of suggested the Republicans are doing worse than they end up doing. On the other hand, the midterms 2 years ago, Democrats did better than the polls suggested. So it's just difficult to be an opinion pollster. And I think we need to recognize we treat opinion polls as though this is a simple thing to do, right? You sort of phone some people up, and then they tell you who they're going to vote for, and you kind of write it down. And you talk to 500 people, and you'll probably be right. Talk to 2,000 people, and you'll definitely be right. That's not how it works. But the first thing to bear in mind is, like, you call people, and you might, I don't know what the precise numbers are these days, but you might call 20 people and get one person to answer your question. So what do those 19 people think? We know they're different from the one person who answered your question, because they wouldn't answer your question. Or maybe they weren't in, but they were different from the person who was in. They've got different habits. They're available at different times. Or maybe they said they wouldn't answer the question. That immediately makes them different. So you're trying to infer from a sample of 5% of the population or whatever it is, who you know are systematically different from the other 95%. What are you going to do with that? You can make all kinds of corrections, but a lot of the corrections are just, well, how wrong were we last time and in what direction? Should we correct like that, or is that overcorrecting? It's just a really, really difficult job. And fundamentally, if you took a step back, the opinion polls are basically right. They said it was about 50-50. It was about 50-50. It's just we actually want to know who's going to win the election, so we're not happy with about 50-50. We actually want to know. But if it was 70-30, and it turned out actually it was 68-32, nobody would care. It's the fact that they keep being wrong enough to change the outcome, or not to change the outcome, but to have misled us about the outcome that bothers people. But we shouldn't really be surprised. And I don't see any change in polling technology that's going to fundamentally change the problem.
You've also written about what I think you called the forecasting paradox, that accurate forecasts are not necessarily useful, and useful forecasts are not necessarily accurate. I hope I've summarised that correctly.
Yes.
Is there any point in forecasts?
I think there is a point in forecasts, but you need to understand what they're for. So let me give you a couple of examples of I think, the weirdness. I give you endless examples of bad forecasts, but let's think about just the demand for forecasts. So here's one. You might remember about 8 years ago now, I think it was Leicester City won the Premiership. And that year, the BBC's chief football writer, I think it was Phil McNulty, could be wrong. Anyway, big football expert at the BBC. The beginning of the season, he said, I think Chelsea are going to be top of the table by Christmas. I think Leicester are fighting for relegation. Well, come Christmas, Chelsea are in the bottom 5, Mourinho's been sacked, the Chelsea manager, and Leicester are at the top. So he says, well, that's what I said at the beginning of the season. Here we are. You know, we've got halfway, and I was completely wrong. Well, fair enough. Anyway, I thought I'd make some forecasts for the rest of the season. Like, why does anybody care? Why does anybody care what you think is going to happen, given what you thought was going to happen has manifestly failed to happen? And yet, I read the article. I was like, oh, interesting, very insightful. They're like Pringles. It's like the snack food of the intellectual world. We can't help but kind of consume them, and we know they're no good. So that's one thing that's going on. There's this insatiable demand for forecasts, and I think one of the reasons why there's an insatiable demand for forecasts is because we're all a bit busy to really get into the details of anything. So if what's going to happen in Afghanistan? If you sit down with an expert on Afghanistan to explain the government that the Taliban have set up and the different foreign affairs pressures on it, but no one's got time for that. So you ask for a little forecast, and the expert says, well, I think things are going to be terrible for the next 3 years, or no, I think things are going to really pick up in the next 3 years. You go, oh, great. And you come away with the illusion you've understood something about Afghanistan, but you haven't understood anything. It's just some guy making stuff up. And he or she could have told you something useful and interesting, but you didn't have time. Yeah, so you just asked for the forecast. So that's one thing. Second thing, related to the demand for forecasts. I was speaking at an event a little bit like this one, but the person interviewing me was less good looking, and the audience were less insightful. And somebody said, this is the first event that we've had since late 2019. And in late 2019, we had an eminent scientist come to us, and he said that he was really worried about pandemics. He showed us how air travel could spread viruses, and a pandemic could go all around the world before we could track it, and it could shut down supply chains, and it was kill tens of millions of people. So the questioner added, or asked me, could you give us a forecast that's as good as that one? And then I thought, hang on a minute. You who were in that room, who heard that forecast in October 2019, you were privileged to have one of the best, most relevant, most consequential, most accurate forecasts anybody's ever received. What did you do? And the answer was, oh, I didn't do anything. I mean, maybe I went home for dinner and I told my spouse, oh, there was this guy at this conference, he was talking about pandemics, it's all very interesting. Nobody did anything. Also, what were you supposed to do? I mean, the big scientist comes and says he's worried about pandemics, but he doesn't know when. I mean, as it happened, in about 6 weeks. But he didn't know that. And none of the people in the room were in a position to do anything about it. So it was an accurate forecast. It was an incredibly accurate forecast. But it's just cheap talk. So all of this is kind of by way of preamble. What is a forecast for? Generally, it's for cheap intellectual gratification. It's not for anything. And that's true whether or not the forecast is true or false. It doesn't help us. But forecasts can help us. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So a long time ago, I used to work in scenario planning. And the whole idea of scenario planning is you get people in a room who really approach a problem from all kinds of different directions. Not just the economists, you've got the political scientists, you've got the environmentalists, you've got the business types. And they discuss what's going on in a particular situation, and then you start telling stories about what might happen. And the amazing thing about stories is that people remember stories. They really get to grips with stories. And the stories, you can hang lots of detail, all that stuff you couldn't be bothered to find out about Afghanistan. Suddenly you're really paying attention to the story. But here's the thing, you tell two stories, and they're mutually contradictory. So now you can remember both stories because they're good stories, they're memorable stories. You can talk about the different stories. You can discuss your strategy in the light of the different stories. Well, that might work in this world, but what about this world? And you're not going to forget the fact that you don't actually know what's going to happen because you just heard two perfectly believable stories that made perfect sense to you and were very persuasive, but can't both be true. So that's one way of approaching the problem of futurology. Just another quick observation, and then I'll shut up, is Phil Tetlock, who's most famous for his work on super forecasting. He gets lots of people in a room, not in a room, he gets lots of people online to answer questions and finally calibrate their forecast, and they come back and they check whether the forecasts were right, and some people are very, very good at this. So he runs these forecasting tournaments. One of the things he's found is that participating in a forecasting tournament for 3 months is very good for your intellectual hygiene. You start seeing shades of grey where other people see black and white. You moderate your political opinions. You think about people on the other side of the political spectrum in a more empathetic way. You start to understand where they're coming from. You're less quick to judge them. And this is all because if you're trying to work out what's going to happen, you have to actually start taking reality seriously. So forecasting done in the right way, maybe in a forecasting tournament, as like an ongoing process, or maybe in a scenario planning workshop, can really help people think through the complexities of the world and make better decisions. And that is true whether or not the forecast is accurate, which is a good thing, because you know the thing about accurate forecasts, you don't know they're accurate until it's too late.
Do you use forecasts? I mean, apart from as intellectual playthings, do you use them? Do you trust them?
No, I don't trust them at all, unless you've got a very, very high data situation. So if I'm I mean, I don't actually make these sort of decisions, but say Amazon were to come to my publishers and say, we're thinking of cutting the price of Tim's book by 10%, and we think that if we cut the price of Tim's book by 10%, obviously that's going to, maybe I get a 10% margin, or a 20% margin, so it's going to halve that margin. So you're making half as much money per book, but we think we're going to sell 3 times as many books if we cut the price by 10%. I basically believe that kind of forecast, because they've got so much data. I mean, they might be lying to me, but I believe that they know the answer to that question with fairly good accuracy, because they've got an enormous amount of data. If Google tells me it's going to take an hour to get somewhere, generally that's roughly right. I mean, as Johnny can tell you, I believed Google how long it was going to take me to get here, and it was slightly wrong.
Very late.
I was just trying to keep Johnny awake, really. But those are very high data forecasts. They're sometimes wrong, but they're not often wrong by a lot. So if there's enough data and something's repeated, then sure, I believe the forecast. But normally when we're talking about forecasts, we're not usually talking about that. We're talking about these big picture geopolitical things. And there's so much hot air, so much lazy thinking, both by the people producing the forecast, but also, just as importantly, by the people consuming them. I have to say, I don't take them very seriously.
Let's move from forecasting to prophesying. And let's talk a little bit, if we could, about the big developments in the economy and things that are shaping it. The buzz is all around AI and how it will change things. Yeah. What in particular do you think we can expect from AI development in the next 18 months or so, and how that will apply and how that will change the economy? So,
the first thing to say is it would be great if it would change the economy, because as we discussed earlier, we've had terribly slow productivity growth. We're kind of waiting for the robot takeover. Please, at some stage, be nice. If this stuff is going to transform the economy, why are we not seeing it in the productivity statistics? Which is a question that economists have been asking since about 1986. What am I expecting AI to do? I don't know. One of the interesting things is that we don't really know what it can do right now. Even if there's no further advancement in AI's capabilities from where it currently is, there's all sorts of stuff to explore about how humans and AIs can best work with each other, how we can sort of figure out error correction, how we can stop it making stuff up. That's, I think, enormously fertile. Just exploiting the stuff that, in principle, we could already do, but we just need to sort of figure out how to get organized. That, I think, is fascinating. So Ethan Mollick, who writes very interestingly about AI, he talks about the jagged frontier of AI capabilities. So you ask an AI to do something, and it's very hard to predict whether it will be able to do it or not. There's a wonderful online test. Sadly, I've blanked on the person who created it. He's a Google engineer. But you can go on this test, and you can ask, it will say, do you think AI can, prove Pythagoras' theorem or whatever? Do you think AI will be able to tell you which is bigger, Paris or Tokyo? Do you think do you think AI can win a game of noughts and crosses? To which the answer is no. Do you think AI can set up a website that will run a noughts and crosses game and the website will play perfectly? The answer is yes. So the AI can't beat you at noughts and crosses, but it can set up a website that will beat you at noughts and crosses. I mean, it's all this sort of stuff. It's so hard to predict what it's going to do. And I went through, and I was basically 50-50 as I went through it. Like, I've got no idea of the capabilities of AI. I just don't know. So there's a lot of exploration going on. So that's interesting. It's exciting. Lots and lots of huge opportunities, lots of risks. I'm not worried about the robot takeover just yet, but I'm worried about all the ways in which it can just be used in a very lazy way, or can create discrimination, or it's full of errors. One thing that I always emphasize when thinking about this is we tend to think of the AI is going to take our jobs. Have you heard the Google Google Notebook language model, Google Notebook LM? So it's designed to help people. It's help writers, basically. So you can grab PDFs that you're reading, your own work, stuff that you're researching, and you can ask the notebook to. You can ask the AI to identify trends in what you found, or find some unexpected connections, and it will footnote everything. It'll say, this is where I found this fact. It's not just making stuff up. So it's really interesting. But then they added this feature. So they had this for about a year. People were talking about it, and that seems interesting. Then they added this feature where you can just go, make me a podcast. So you can upload a chapter of my book. Well, hopefully you can't, because hopefully you don't have the unencrypted version. But I can upload a chapter of my book, and just press a button, and these two rather giddy Americans will start talking about how this chapter is completely amazing, and you've never heard anything like it. And they're totally artificial voices. It's a totally artificial conversation. But they really it really feels like they both read the chapter in detail, got it, and could talk in an intelligent way. So we are totally screwed, you and I, Johnny. We are in big trouble. Anyway, so I interrupted myself, which the computer would never do. They'd be doing a much better job than I would. We talk about the computers taking our jobs. We talk about the robot taking our jobs, the AI taking our jobs. That's not what happens. What happens is they take tasks. They do particular tasks. And because we're very adaptable, we kind of contort ourselves around the new technological capability. So you can see this most obviously when they introduced lasers and barcode scanners at supermarkets. And then, it took a little while to think about it. And then suddenly we're all working as unpaid checkout assistants. Because the AI can't do that for us, but it can provide us with the tools, and we sort of fit in. So they reshape jobs. They make jobs different. They'll take particular capabilities rather than taking whole jobs. And I think that's the way to think about what AI is likely to do. And just to give you two very, very quick examples of this, one hopeful and one less hopeful. So digital spreadsheets. So the Lotus 123, actually before Lotus 123, VisiCalc. VisiCalc's the first digital spreadsheet, 1979. It just transforms accountancy overnight. Suddenly, accountants get hold of this thing, and they don't tell their clients. So their clients say, we need some rush job on the accounts. And the accountant's like, yep. And they'll leave it for 2 days. And then they'll send the bill for 2 days' work until the clients figure it out. So you would think, well, that's going to put the accountants out of work. What is Microsoft Excel but a robot accountant? I mean, that is what a robot accountant is. But it doesn't put the accountants out of work. There are more accountants now than ever. They're just doing more stuff. They're doing more creative stuff. And who doesn't want a creative accountant, right? So this job that there used to be these people called accounting clerks or accounting clerks who would do the arithmetic. And now the computer does the arithmetic, but you still have accountants, and they're doing more interesting things. That's a hopeful vision for AI. Here's a really depressing one. The Jennifer unit. So the Jennifer unit's a bit like this, only it's got an earpiece. And if you're working in a warehouse, say as an Amazon picker, or you're just sort of wandering around, Ocado or whatever, you're picking stuff off shelves. And it used to be you had to know where stuff was, and you'd go to the shelves, you'd get the stuff off the shelves, and you'd tick it off a list, and that's how you'd get all the stuff. But now you have the Jennifer unit. The Jennifer unit knows where everything is. So the Jennifer unit will just say, okay, take 20 steps forward to aisle B, then go to shelf 6. then take 13 copies of Tim Harford's How to Make the World Add Up. Actually, it won't say that. It won't even say that. It'll say, take 5 copies of Tim Harford's How to Make the World Add Up. Take 5 more copies of Tim Harford's How to Make the World Add Up. Take 3 more copies, because it doesn't trust you to count to 13. You can't count to 13, that's complicated, people get it wrong. So it'll do it in chunks of 5. All it wants is people's eyes and their hands. It's treating them like flesh robots. So in the case of Excel, you have a job that's already quite interesting being made more interesting because the robot, the spreadsheet, does the boring bit. In the case of the Jennifer unit, you have a job that's already quite boring, being a warehouse picker, and the little bit of intellectual stimulation you had is gone, and now you're a flesh robot. And people who work in warehouses go to sleep dreaming of Jennifer talking to them. So there's different ways in which AI can play out. It's going to play out differently for different jobs. Some of it's going to be very unpleasant, and some of it could be really cool.
Right, if there's one phrase I will take away from this evening, it's the phrase flesh robot. Thank you for that, Tim. It's time for your questions, if we could. I'll take them, if I may, in groups of 3. So, sir, first of all, you, if you would. Thank you very much.
Hello. My question relates to your point made that there didn't seem to be a reason for the decline in productivity, which must have been part of that 30% decline you told us about at the beginning between the trend and where we got to. And it may also relate to the future insofar as people are talking in the press today and last few days about the reaction to the budget as being negative and it's upset the CBI and so forth. Is that all referring just to animal spirits, and is that what we should expect?
Thank you. And if we can get the microphone right to the front. Here we are. Thank you. Sir.
Hi, so my question's more like an international scale. So like when you look at countries which are like very economically prosperous v countries that aren't, there isn't that much tying them together. It's not like all economically prosperous countries are like not landlocked and filled with oil. So I was curious what you think like causes some nations to succeed economically and some to fail.
Thank you. You just pass the microphone to the gentleman there. Thank you.
Hi, Tim. My question is on immigration. Do you think that there is a trade-off between, in the UK, levels of immigration and GDP growth, not total, per capita? And if so, what do you think is the wisest course of action for the Labour government to pursue on immigration?
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
Lovely.
So yeah, I mean, the decline in productivity. I mean, I said it was a lot of it was mysterious. I mean, by mysterious, I mean there's a lot of different things going on, and we're not sure exactly how important different components are. Some of the stuff I would point to, it's very difficult to build anything in this country. We have very, very strict planning laws. It makes housing very expensive, which is a problem in its own right because people need somewhere to live. But it also makes it much more difficult for places that are doing well to expand. And which is a classic way that an economy grows. So, some places are doing well, some places are not doing well. People move to the places that are doing well and they expand, but they can't if you can't build more houses. Infrastructure investment is another big problem. Investment in general, both public sector and private sector investment, very, very low in the UK. It's been very low for 40 years, and probably too London-centric. And maybe that's connected to some of the other points that I've made. So, I mean, these are all reasons contributing to the decline in productivity. I did a TV show. I tried to avoid TV. I much more have a face for radio, but I did a TV show for Channel 4 just before the election called Skint, which you can have a look at if you like. Try and discuss some of the different aspects going on with productivity. In terms of people's reaction to the budget, I'm not surprised that people don't like it. I mean, it wouldn't have been my choice for budget. If I were Chancellor, and there's zero chance of that, I would have done things a bit differently. But fundamentally, we're running a deficit, so we're spending more money than we're taking in tax. The tax burden is at an all-time high, and we're clearly not spending enough money to fund the basic services, so the water, the trains, the NHS. Something's got to give, right? I mean, this is what slow growth looks like. So the first thing you need to do is raise some taxes on somebody and invest some of that money. Yeah, and maybe patch up the public services a bit and maybe invest a bit. I mean, it's obvious that that's going to have to happen. Well, I don't know about you. I don't like paying taxes. I love nice public services, but I'd rather not pay taxes, actually. I'd rather keep some of the money myself. So somebody's going to have to pay the taxes, and the people who have to pay the taxes are going to complain. And I don't think there should be any surprise about that. And I don't think that really tells us anything fundamental. And as for whether the negative talk affects the economy, I mean, a little bit around the edges, but not much. I don't think economies are generally driven by animal spirits. To the extent that they're driven by emotions at all, there is a certain confidence in investment. Do you trust this economy? Do you trust this government? But just generally the structure of the UK economy enough to provide a return on investment. If you were business and you were thinking, shall I train my workers? Shall I buy a new computer? Shall I open a new store? Shall I build a new factory? Is this the kind of economy where you want to do that? To that extent, emotion matters and animal spirits matter. But generally, I mean, it's not like we're in a depression where people are all trying to save money and not spend because they're worried. People are spending money. You wouldn't have had inflation if people weren't spending money. So I don't think it's a question of animal spirits, it's a question of investment. In terms of economic prosperity, I mean, the fundamental, if you're really going to get very reductive about it, places with good governance, both in terms of the way the government itself conducts itself, but also the law courts, the culture, they do well. And that's true whether you're some enormous resource-rich economy like the United States, or whether you're a tiny place like Singapore or Hong Kong. And places that improve their governance can get rich quite quickly. So China, although I don't think anybody would claim that China's governance is perfect, it's certainly not, and there's some very worrying trends there. It's a lot better than it was in 1978. And that has just led to this unbelievable unlocking of economic growth. So if there's a single secret to economic prosperity, it's that. Of course, there's no single secret to good governance. So you're just kicking the explanation down the road. But I would emphasize that rather than, it would be great to have a massive oil field, or it would be great to have this resource or that resource, or great to have ports. I mean, they can all be useful, but governance is fundamental. Immigration. So I was lucky enough to listen to a talk earlier this afternoon by Madeleine Sumption, who is one of the UK's leading authorities on immigration. She knows far more than I do. And what she said is the evidence on immigration, evidence of immigration on per capita GDP is weak and ambiguous. That we don't really know whether immigration improves GDP per capita. So just for those who are not economics wonks, so GDP, gross domestic product, is basically the total value of everything the economy produces. GDP per capita is where you just divide that by the number of people in the economy. And almost mathematically, if you have more immigration, your GDP is probably going to grow because the immigrants are going to do something. They're going to get a job and they're going to buy stuff, and that will increase GDP. But it could lower GDP per capita potentially if they don't have very good skills, they don't get very good jobs, they're not producing a lot, so it might lower the average. I mean, the main thing it depends on is, do you get the investment to go along with the immigration? There's also a question as to how skilled are the immigrants. But I mean, any economy is going to have a mix of high-skilled and low-skilled people, and everyone has their place and everyone contributes. So do you get investment? Do you get businesses investing in capital? Do you get governments investing in capital alongside the immigration or not? That's the question, and we don't really know a lot about whether immigration tends to stimulate investment. We know that there's underinvestment in the UK economy, but maybe it would be worse if we hadn't had immigration. maybe it wouldn't. There is an interesting question as to how much we care about GDP per capita, whether that's the thing we want to make the focus of our policy. So there are other considerations. One consideration is just the welfare of the immigrants themselves. So we're quite generous. We give money to countries that have less developed economies than we do. And yet, we're often quite reluctant to have somebody improve their lot by, if you move from Ethiopia to the UK, you're going to experience a huge growth in your standard of living, and probably you're going to send money back to your relatives in Ethiopia. So that's a fantastic development program, much more effective than sending the money to Ethiopia. But people just, for various reasons, some very kind of lefty, liberal reasons, and some very kind of hard right reasons, all kinds of people, somehow that doesn't sit right with them. But that's a possible goal of policy. But the other thing to bear in mind is we've got quite a lot of debt. So if you grow the economy, even if you don't grow the economy per person, you just grow the economy, the debt burden shrinks. Because the new people who are coming in are contributing, paying taxes, and one of the things they're paying taxes for is to pay the interest on the debt that was run up by a government before they ever arrived in the country. So that's kind of a good deal. But there we go. I mean, I don't think we know enough about the economic impacts of immigration. I've got my personal opinions, but they are opinions. They're not data-driven. And I'm always struck by how little people are interested in the data, really. Everyone has their view, pro-immigration, anti-immigration, and the data never seem to convince them.
More questions, if you would.
I wanted to come back to your points about artificial intelligence. And can you comment on the large language models that are being used to underpin AI? There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of investment going into AI, but there's also, I'm picking up a sense that the quality of the data that will go into AI models going forward could potentially run out, and therefore will the benefit of AI truly be as good as everybody's hyped up about?
Thank you, sir. We'll get the microphone over to the lady in the front here. Thank you. We'll come to you in a second, sir. Madam.
At the beginning, you mentioned degrowth. I'm the sort of person whose environmentalist friends send them articles on degrowth, and they never make any sense to me. Could you explain the theory behind it, and is it as mad as it sounds, or is there something behind it?
Thank you. Sir.
In the recent budget, there was a bit of a debate around the farmers' inheritance tax. One side saying it's $500 a year, and some others saying it's 75% of farmers. I guess a bit of a data debate. Who do you think was right, if any, and how did they get it wrong?
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you. I mean, the great, wonderful thing about More or Less is it's not on all year round. Well, it is on the World Service. It's not on Radio 4 all year round. And we finished just before this policy was announced. And so I've basically not my problem. Leave it to BBC Verify. I'll be back in March when they figured out the answer.
Everyone's forgotten about it.
I have not. I'm sure the farmers might have forgotten about it. I don't have it. I've not studied it, so you're not going to get an authoritative answer. But from me, I've been doing other things and blissfully letting other people worry about it. But one of the things to bear in mind is that so if a farm is a tax asset, if somebody could buy a farm and it has a value as a tax shelter, that increases the market value of the farm. And that's true whether or not anybody actually does buy the farm and use it as a tax shelter. It's true whether or not the farmer dies and passes it to his or her children. It's the value of the farm is there because the option to use it as a tax shelter is there. And therefore, any farm that was small enough to have been exempt from inheritance tax and is now big enough to be liable to inheritance tax is now worth less, because that possibility has disappeared, regardless of whether that possibility was ever going to be used. Now, is that bad for farmers? I mean, broadly speaking, if you own a farm, yes. If you want to be a farmer and buy a farm, they just got cheaper. But I think just that observation reminds you of the different ways in which a tax can affect people. It's not as simple as how many people will die and try to leave a farm to their heirs and now be liable for inheritance tax when previously they weren't liable for inheritance tax. Like that seems like that's the question to answer, but there's a broader question. Large language models, I'm very aware that I'm not an expert. I'm an economist. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not a large language model expert. But there is this concern about running out of data. The point I made earlier, I think, stands, which is they can already do a lot that we don't really understand, and so there's a huge amount of gain to be milked out of this technology, but just sort of figuring out what they can do. I mean, people say, and this seems to be true as far as I can work out, that they're basically just text prediction engines, just very, very clever text prediction engines. We're discovering you can do pretty amazing things with a text prediction engine. Like, who knew how good a text prediction engine could get? But yeah, I worry about the lack of data. I think they are amazing. It is unclear whether, and they have been getting better very, very fast. It's very unclear whether you've got a situation where it just goes like that, or whether it's kind of an S-curve. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. We'll find out. One thing I find absolutely fascinating is that they are plausibility engines. I mean, they're machines for producing stuff that seems like it should be about right. Which, when you think about them as text prediction, that makes sense. So they're basically Boris Johnson in machine form. And you're like, yeah, that sounds, hang on a minute. So that's a potential problem. They don't even know what the truth is. So you can ask them stuff and it'll tell you, and it might be true. But all you can really know is that it's plausible. And the most interesting demonstration I saw of this was one of my old tutors was always fascinated. He taught me economic theory and game theory, and he was always fascinated in the particular question of knowledge partitions. So knowledge partitions is like who knows what when, and there's a whole class of logic puzzles that are all about who knows what when, including one that's called the Jennifer's birthday problem. And the Jennifer's birthday problem is like Jennifer's got these two friends, they don't know her birthday, there are 10 possible birthdays. And she says, I'm going to tell you which month. I'm going to tell you which day of the month. And then, I didn't catch your name, so what was your name? Russ. So then Russ is like, so I tell Russ the month. And then Russ is like, well, I don't know your birthday. And then Johnny goes, interesting. I also don't know your birthday. And then Russ goes, well, in that case, I do know your birthday. And then Johnny goes, well, in that case, I know your birthday. Then the question is, what's Jennifer's birthday? Anyway. Give this to GPT-4, to GPT-4, and it will solve it. It'll get it right. It'll get it right in all kinds of different ways. You can ask it to do it. It'll do it over and over again each time. It'll phrase it differently. It's not just grabbing it from Wikipedia. It'll explain the logic. It's amazing. So what my tutor did was to take the Jennifer's birthday puzzle, change the names of the 3 people in the puzzle, and change the months named in the puzzle, but nothing else. So nothing has changed about the puzzle except the labels. Nothing important has changed. GPT-4 immediately fails to solve the puzzle in a very plausible way. It'll tell you it solved the puzzle, it'll give you the answer, it'll show you the reasoning, and you're like, it can't be right because that's the wrong answer. But where did it go wrong? And you really, really have to concentrate to find where it went wrong. And I think it just shows how deep the plausibility rabbit hole goes. And how clearly it must have been relying on Wikipedia in some way that we didn't really understand. And that you would have to know the answer to even spot that it made the mistake. So, there's a lot to explore. I don't think it's going to be fascinating, but I do not know what's going to happen. I really don't. Degrowth. So degrowth is the idea that the environmental impact of our economic activity, keeping these lights on, keeping this room warm, people traveling here by various methods of transport, the food we eat, everything we do, the environmental impact of that is unsustainable, which it is. And the solution to that is that the economy needs to shrink. So we need less consumption, we need less moving around, the rooms need to be a bit colder, lights need to be dimmer. Basically, we need to do less. I'm not a degrowth advocate. If a degrowth advocate might express this in a different way. My problem with that argument, well, there are two problems. Number one, not going to happen. Just look around you. Election of Donald Trump, just look around you. It is not going to happen. People are not going to vote for it. And so there's no point in advocating a policy that people will not go for. I cannot imagine any circumstances under which people would say, yes, that seems great. Maybe that's a failure of my imagination, but that's how I see it. But the second thing is, it's not necessary. So there's lots of stuff that we do where the economy has become much more environmentally efficient. So, for example, the CO2 emissions of the UK, and I'm going to get the details wrong, but the gist is right. I think they were twice as high per person in the 1970s as they are today. And the economy is much bigger, right? I mean, I know it's not done brilliantly since 2007, but it's much bigger than it was when I was born in the 1970s, and yet far less CO2 emissions. And why? Because we stopped burning coal, which is very carbon intensive. We replaced it with gas, and now increasingly we're phasing out the gas, and we're replacing that with solar and wind, a little bit of nuclear as well. But also, just the appliances are much more efficient. So people's homes are better insulated. The cars are more efficient. The light bulbs are unbelievably more efficient. Farming uses less fertilizer, and so on and so on and so on. So there are lots of ways in which we can get more for less. It's not happening fast enough. So the climate's still changing. We've already made it have irreversible impacts on the climate. We need to do more. We need to go further. But what I would like to see is not, well, let's just shrink the economy, but to go, well, hang on, let's incentivize specific things that we know are going to have an impact. So let's put a tax on carbon emissions. Let's incentivize the use of public transport. Let's incentivize a shift to electric vehicles, or better, bicycles. We love bicycles. Let's put more tax on beef and on lamb, which are associated with methane production, which is a real climate-forcing gas, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you might disagree with the details, but the point is you can target this specifically rather than going, you know what we just need is the whole economy, the good stuff, the bad stuff, everything just needs to shrink. I don't think that's necessary, and I don't think it's going to happen. And if there's somebody in the audience who's thinking, well, I'm a degrowth person and Tim hasn't understood degrowth, well, you might be right, but that's also part of the problem. It's called degrowth. People are going to misunderstand it. So we definitely need environmental policies, but they need to be targeted on the actual problems. There's no GDP. It's just this thing we made up. GDP doesn't do anybody any harm. It's burning fossil fuels that causes harm, or eating animals that emit methane that causes harm, or land use, or water use, or whatever. All these things cause harm. Let's focus on the things that cause harm and try to do less of them, try to do them in a more efficient way. That's what we need to do.
I am bitterly sorry, but we do have to wrap it up there. We are out of time, and I am sorry if you had further questions for Tim, but the time has come. We have to wrap it. I need to thank Tim. I've not heard so much laughter in a discussion about economics. They were laughing with you, I promise, not at you. Thank you for coming as well. Thank you to Guinness Global Investors for being part of this event, and to Intelligence Squared. But most of all, thank you very much to the audience. It's been brilliant to have you here. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you and good night. Good.